My name's Sarah, and I'm not a paranormal person. I don't read books about monsters, I don't watch those ghost shows on TV, and I sure as hell never thought I'd be one of those people who have a story to tell. I've lived in Nova Scotia my whole life, born and raised. I'm practical, I keep my head down, and I've always figured the strangest thing in the woods was a nosy neighbor. This happened a couple years ago. I was driving home with my daughter Emily. She was 15 at the time. It's just the two of us. I'm a single mother. We'd spent the evening at my sister's place, just outside Halifax. We ate supper with her and her family, visited with the nieces, and stayed later than I planned. By the time we finally hit the road, it was full dark. Now, if you've ever driven the back highways around here, you know what I'm talking about. 2 lanes of blacktop, no lights. You can go 10, maybe even 15 minutes without seeing another car entirely. That kind of road where your headlights only reach so far, and just beyond that is blackness. At the time, Emily had her earbuds in, staring at her phone, and I was just focusing on the drive, sipping a lukewarm coffee that I had brought from my sister's house. We were on one of those stretches of road where you can kind of feel the whole world's asleep except for you. It was just us, the hum of the tires, and the shadows of the forest sliding past us. But things quickly changed, and they changed our lives forever. We were maybe 20 minutes outside of town when Emily suddenly pulled one earbud out, leaned forward, and said, "Mom, there's something in the ditch." The first thing I noticed was how tight her voice was. Whatever it was had really spooked her. I glanced over quick, just enough to catch movement along the tree line. At first, I thought it was a deer about to jump out, so I tensed up, ready to hit the brakes. Hitting a deer around here is not something you want to do in the middle of the night. It could take forever for somebody to come help you. But what I saw wasn't even a deer. Out of the darkness, this thing broke into the open. It came out of the trees on 2 legs, not stumbling or moving awkwardly like a bear standing up. It moved smooth and confident, like it belonged upright. The headlights hit it full on, and for a split second I saw every detail. This creature, or monster, was huge, at least 2 feet taller than your average man. It had broad shoulders and a chest like a man's, but it was covered in thick, dark fur, and that fur shimmered when the light hit it. Its arms swung long at its sides, and they ended in hands that were tipped with claws. And the head looked like a wolf's. It had a long muzzle, perky ears, and a mouth that was slightly open, so you could catch a flash of these sharp teeth. And then, if it wasn't bad enough, it turned its head towards us. Those eyes locked right on me through the windshield, and they seemed to glow yellow in the beams of my headlights, but not like a reflection in my opinion, like they were lit from within. But even then you could see the intelligence, the awareness of this creature. It knew we were there, and it knew what it was doing. Emily started screaming, "Mom, Mom, what is that?" She started to cry and curled into the seat, hands over her mouth. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, and my foot hovered between the brake and the gas, not sure which one was safer. This thing didn't chase us exactly. It just kept pace with us, loping along the side of the car for several moments. These long strides looked almost effortless, and the speed of this thing was just incredible. I kept glancing over, my heart hammering, every nerve in my body telling me that we were in danger. I was afraid that this thing could smash through the window, get into the car, or even grab my daughter. And just then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it veered off. It took one stride back towards the ditch, toward the tree line, and it was gone, like it had just melted into the woods or something. Neither of us really spoke the rest of the drive. We were in shock and crying. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and Emily just sobbed quietly beside me. All I could really tell her was, "It's okay, baby. It's okay. It's not by us anymore." When we finally pulled into our driveway, the porch light never looked so welcoming. We sat there for a long minute, parked in the car, both of us staring straight ahead, trying to process what it was that we had just seen. And to be honest with you, I don't think we ever really have. For the first couple of weeks, we barely spoke about it. Every time I even tried to hint at what we'd seen, Emily would shut down. She'd shake her head, plug her ears, or just storm off to her room. I think she was scared that if she admitted it out loud, it would make it so much more real for her. and she was just avoiding the thought altogether. But me, I couldn't let it go. At night, after she was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop and type in things like werewolf, 2 legs, Canada, or upright animal, Nova Scotia. I thought maybe I'd find nothing, but instead I found more than I even wanted to. The amount of results were overwhelming. Reports, some recent, some old. People call it a dogman. Different provinces, different details, even different countries, but the same theme. A werewolf-like creature that could move like a man. Was this really true? Things like this weren't supposed to be real, but the proof was undeniable. I'd seen it with my own 2 eyes, and so did my little girl. But the fact that so many other people have seen it around the entire world was just baffling to me. Every time I read on, my skin prickled. I'd think back to that thing's face turning towards us, those glowing eyes locking onto mine, and my heart would start to pound all over again. And then Emily caught me one night. She came downstairs for water, saw the screen, and snapped at me. "Don't. Just don't, Mom. Please." I closed the laptop, but later that night, she came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. She was pale, and her eyes were wide. She looked like she'd been crying. I tried to comfort her, but she said, "It wasn't a dog, Mom. It wasn't a wolf either. It was a monster like in the movies, and it knew that we saw it." And from then on, she was okay to talk about it. We didn't talk about it every day, but enough. Sometimes she'd break down crying, saying she could still see its teeth in her dreams. Other times she'd get angry, insisting that nobody would believe us if we spoke out about it. Me, I just kept replaying it over and over. The quickness of its strides, the way it kept pace with the car, the way it didn't look surprised or scared. It actually looked like it was enjoying what it was doing. Like that fear gave it some euphoria. And it was like it wanted us to see it. Like it was letting us know that it was real. And then that thought haunted me worse than anything else. It was maybe 3 or 4 months later when the next piece of this story landed in my lap. By then I'd gotten better at keeping my mouth shut about it, but that night never really felt like it left me. I was careful who I told. Most people rolled their eyes if you even said the word werewolf. But then one day at work, I was chatting with my coworker Marie. We'd been friends for years, the kind of friend you can actually trust. We started talking about weird things. I don't know how we got on the subject. But then I told her, "Hey, can I tell you something weird?" I don't know what made me do it. It was out of the blue, and I'd never really admitted what we'd seen to people. She gave me that look like, uh-oh, where's this going? But then she nodded. So I told her. I told her about that night, what me and Emily saw. I didn't use the word dogman or werewolf, just described it plain. She listened and didn't laugh. She didn't cut me off. When I finished, she set her coffee down and said, "You should really talk to my husband." That caught me off guard, and I asked her why. "Because he saw something like that too," she said. And I could tell from the tone of her voice and the look on her face that she was dead serious. It turned out her husband Dan worked at a truck depot a few towns over. He worked early mornings and was usually one of the first ones there. One dawn, not long before Christmas, he was actually the first person to arrive and was walking across the yard when he saw movement near the line of parked rigs. He thought it was just a stray dog rooting around, but when he got closer, he realized it was too big to even be a bear, let alone a dog. And then, the thing that he was watching stood upright, right in front of his eyes, and it seemed like it could shift back and forth between how it walked. He said it was tall, broad-shouldered, furred, and was sniffing around the gravel like it was tracking something. The way it walked was slow, weaving between the trailers, almost casual. It wasn't scared or rushing, and it was just meticulous the way that it moved. When I finally sat down with Dan, his eyes told me everything before he even opened his mouth. He wasn't lying. He wasn't joking about what he'd seen. He was a man who'd seen the same impossible thing that Emily and I had. We decided to compare notes properly, not just by talking, but by writing them down. I took a piece of paper, he took another, and we both wrote down what we saw, detail for detail, before we even shared what had happened or what it looked like out loud. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, both of us with lined paper and pens like we were back in school, and Dan said, "Let's just write it out. No talking. That way we'll know if we're really seeing the same thing." So that's what we did. For 10 minutes, the only sound in that room was the scratch of a pen and paper, and Marie fussing with the kettle in the background. My hand shook a little as I wrote, but the details poured out of me like they'd been bottled up for too long. But just reliving that in a way where I was writing it down, where it was me and my thoughts, just made me relive that night, and that terror hit me all over again. When we finished, we swapped papers. I took a moment to compose myself, and then we started to compare our notes. That's when the hairs on my neck really stood up. His description might as well have been mine. Height? He put 7 to 8 feet tall. I had written, taller than the car by far, about 8 feet. For the build, he said, broad-shouldered, muscular, with long arms hanging low. I wrote, tall, thick through the chest, long arms. For the head, we both used the same word without planning it. Werewolf. We each went on to describe it with a wolf's head, a long muzzle, pointed or upright ears, and eyes that looked human. But not in the color, just in the intelligence. For the gait, he wrote smooth, natural on 2 legs, like it was built for it. I wrote confident stride, didn't look awkward, almost moved like a man. The differences were so small it gave me chills. I'd put yellow eyes that glowed. He wrote golden eyes that shined in the light. I wrote shaggy fur. He wrote coarse fur. Different words, same picture. I sat there staring at the 2 pages, my heart thudding. There was no way we'd both dreamed the same dream. We'd seen it. Different towns, different situations, but the same creature. Marie looked between us and said, almost in a whisper, "So, you're not both crazy. This actually happened." Dan folded up the paper and just shoved it in his jacket pocket like he didn't want to look at it anymore. I folded mine too, but I still have it tucked in the back of my journal. Proof in case I ever start doubting myself. After that, life eventually went on, but it never went back to normal. For me and Emily, driving at night was never the same. She's 17 now and still refuses to sit by the window when we're on back roads after dark. Every time the headlights sweep across the tree line, I can see her tense up, waiting like that creature is going to pounce out at us again. She doesn't scream about it, but I know she's reliving it. And you know what? I do too. I changed in quieter ways. I avoid that stretch of highway if I can. I keep my eyes glued to the ditches and the trees when I can't. And I don't laugh at monster stories anymore. What we saw wasn't a story. It was flesh and blood, and it was smart enough to know we were there. The funny thing is, it made me and Emily closer. I mean, we don't always agree. She's a teenager after all, but this is something only we share. A secret stamped on both of our memories. We survived it together, and even though it terrifies us, it also bonded us. And Dan's family changed too. He admitted that he started carrying a big flashlight and even an old rifle to the depot when he had the dawn shift. Although he said, I don't think it would matter if it came down to it. Marie believes him. How could she not? But she told me once that it unsettled her, knowing something like that was out there, near where her husband worked. Their kids are a lot younger than Emily, and they don't know the exact details, but they know enough to notice how serious their dad gets when he talks about sticking to the lights. Every now and then, we check in with each other. Not often, not dramatic, just a quick word over coffee, a text now and then. We don't even have to say the word. Just knowing someone else saw it too, that we're not crazy, makes this burden a little easier to carry. But here's the truth that I can't shake. We thought we were 2 families living normal lives in quiet Canadian towns. But it turns out, something else is living here too. And I really, really don't think that they're going anywhere. My name's Charles. I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for monsters or ghosts or any of that crap. I never have been. I swing a hammer for a living. I smoke too much, drink my beer too fast, and don't have time for fairy tales. If you'd asked me a few years ago if I believed in werewolves, I probably would have laughed in your face and told you that you needed a psychologist. But a few years back, me and my wife decided the city was eating us alive. There was too much traffic, neighbors right on top of you, kids stuck inside all day with video games instead of fresh air. We wanted better for them, so we packed up and rented this old farmhouse just outside of this little town in northern Ontario. This place sat on a couple of acres, right where the pavement turns to gravel. Out front, we had a cracked driveway and a sagging porch. But out back, nothing but trees, and miles of forest. The house itself was old but solid, and I liked that. None of that drywall junk. Just real wood and stone. The kind of place you can put your hand on the wall and feel the history in it. The kids got their own rooms upstairs, and me and Jen had ours on the main floor. And then there was this shed. It just sat there at the tree line, leaning a little, roof mossed over. From the porch you could see it, squatting there in the shadows like it was just waiting on somebody. First time I ever laid eyes on that thing, I thought, well, that's gonna need some fixing. But I had no idea what I was really looking at. Our first day out there, we're dragging boxes inside. The kids are running around like it's Christmas, and Jen says, "What's that smell?" At first, I thought maybe something died under the porch, but the closer I got to the back of the yard, the worse it got. Like wet animal and garbage left out for too long. And that's when I realized it wasn't coming from the house at all. It was that damn shed. Now, this wasn't some neat little garden shed. It was bigger, almost like a one-car garage that somebody threw together in rough boards and a tin roof. The door was hanging crooked, and the rusted padlock had broke a long time ago. I yanked it open and nearly gagged. The smell hit me like a punch. Inside looked less like storage and more like, I don't know, a nest. There was straw, old blankets, clumps of hair stuck in the corners, and bones too. Lots of them. Some I could tell were deer, others I didn't even want to guess. The walls had these long gouges like something had been clawing at them, not scratches from a raccoon. These were deep, like someone went at the wood with a set of knives or something. I looked around, and at first I just thought probably an old bear den. But I think I said that mostly to convince myself. My son Sam, who was 10 at the time, wrinkled his nose, and Mia, who was 8, covered hers. She gave me and Jen this look that said, "I don't like this." And Jen just said, "Don't you dare leave this mess for later." So, we dragged everything out, shoveled the straw into piles, scooped up the bones with an old snow shovel, and tried not to think too hard about what they used to belong to. I found a dead bird half buried in the corner, and that was enough for Mia. She went running back to the porch. By the time we were done, we were sweaty, pissed off, and still gagging from the stench, but the shed was empty and finally cleaned out. I figured I'd come back later with some bleach and call it good. We all kind of laughed it off that night, and Jen just said, "Welcome to the country, free wildlife exhibit out back." But I remember standing on the porch after everyone went inside, looking at that shed sitting in the dark against the tree line, and for a second I had this feeling that whatever had been there might not be too happy that we'd cleaned it out. But nothing happened for a couple of weeks. Those weeks went by and we'd settled in pretty good. The kids were back in school, Jen was making friends in town, and I was doing my own thing, working during the day and fixing up the house at night. By then the shed was just another chore we'd crossed off the list, and I didn't think twice about it. But then one night in the middle of September, which was dead quiet out there, I woke up to the sound of a scream. Not just a scared little yelp kind of scream. I'm talking lungs full, blood-curdling, makes your heart stop kind of scream. And I knew instantly that it was Mia. I bolted out of bed so fast I nearly broke my toe on the dresser. I tore up the stairs 2 at a time, with Jen right behind me. We hit her door and found her sitting up in bed, shaking so bad her teeth might as well have been chattering. Something was looking in my window. She was crying and pointing towards the glass. Now, her room faced the backyard, towards the trees and that damn shed. I glanced out the window, but there was nothing but darkness and my own reflection staring back at me. I tried to calm her down, saying maybe it was just a dream or the shadows of a tree branch or something like that. But she screamed hysterically, "No, it was real. It was huge. It had a face like a wolf, with glowing eyes. It was right there, Daddy, looking in at me." That stopped me cold. Because you see, she was on the second floor, for God's sakes. What would have even been peering in? No wolf, no coyote, hell, not even a black bear could have gotten up there and looked through the window the way that she said it did. I glanced at Jen and saw the same thought flicker across her face, but neither of us said anything out loud. Not then, at least. We just sat down on the edge of Mia's bed and wrapped my arms around her, saying, "You're safe. Nothing's gonna hurt you here. You got me, and you got your mom. We'll keep watch." Then Sam wandered in, rubbing his eyes and muttering, "What's going on?" I told him it was nothing and to get back to bed. He didn't look very convinced, but he did as he was told. We finally got Mia calmed down enough to sleep, but Jen and I stayed up the rest of the night. I even went outside with a flashlight, walked the perimeter, checked the grass under her window. There was nothing. No tracks, no scuffs, no sign of anything that could have been following around the house and getting up there and looking in her window like she said. But here's the part that stuck with me. When I was standing out there looking up at her window, I realized that for something to peer in the way that she described, it would have had to jump up onto the roof of the first story, because there was not even a way to climb up there. So I told myself it was just her imagination. Kids scare easy, right? But deep down, I guess I knew better. The look on her face, the way that she shook, I knew that she wasn't imagining it. She saw something, and I knew my daughter wasn't the kind of kid that would make something up. And I couldn't shake the thought that maybe whatever had made that shed its home wasn't done with us after all. After that night, with Mia screaming about the thing at her window, I told myself it was a fluke. Kids dream, they scare themselves, end of story. But something just didn't sit right with me. And over the next couple of weeks, little things started adding up to the mystery. It began with noises. At first, I thought it was just country living. You know, raccoons, deer, whatever moves around at night. But these weren't the normal skitter-scratch kind of sounds. These were heavy. I'd be lying in bed with the window cracked and hear crunching footsteps on the gravel drive. They were slow and deliberate, like something was walking circles around the house. But every time, by the time I'd get up, grab a flashlight and step outside, nothing would be there. Not even the sound of something running off. Just silence. Then came the scratching sounds. One night, around midnight, I heard it plain as day. Claws dragging across the siding of the house. Long and slow, like something wanted us to hear it. I ran outside, thinking maybe a raccoon had gotten up there, but I shined the light next to the wall, and there was nothing. The sound stopped the second I opened the door. And the next morning when I checked, I'll be damned if there weren't faint gouges in the paint, but too high up for any small animal. And I knew that they weren't there the day before. After that, the smell showed up. Sometimes when I'd step outside for a smoke, the air would carry this stench, like rotting meat or wild animals, but times 10. It wasn't constant, and not everywhere, but in pockets, especially near the shed or the back tree line. And it was strong enough to make me gag once, and you know what? I'm not the gagging type. We ended up getting a dog about a month in, a mutt from a local shelter. I figured it would make the kids feel safer after Mia's scare. He was this big, friendly, goofy guy, a shepherd mix that we named Bobo. But he wanted nothing to do with the woods. The first night I took him out to do his business, he froze at the edge of the yard, growling low, ears flat. Every time after that, he'd do the same thing, stare into the tree line, hackles up, whining until I dragged him back inside, or he'd had enough and dragged me back inside. It was like he knew that something was out there, and it was something that didn't belong, or something that was dangerous. And then there were my smoke breaks. Late nights, after everyone went to bed, I'd step out on the porch with a cigarette, just me and the dark. And at first it was peaceful, the kind of quiet you can't get in the city. But soon enough, it stopped feeling peaceful. I'd light up, take a drag, and get this crawling sensation on my skin like eyes were on me. Sometimes I'd even catch movement in the trees. Just a shadow slipping between the trunks, never clear, but enough to make me put the smoke out early and head inside. I didn't tell Jen or the kids about that. There was no point in scaring them more, and they never went outside at dark anyway. But I'll be honest with you. Every night that passed, I felt less like a man smoking on his porch and more like prey standing in a spotlight. And then, one night in October, after everyone was asleep, I was out back like usual, cigarette glowing in the dark. The first thing I noticed was the silence. You know, out here you get used to the rhythm. Crickets, frogs, owls, creatures chittering, bugs doing their thing. It's never quiet. The night is a very busy time for wildlife. But that night, nothing. Dead still. Every animal had gone on vacation. Even the dog didn't follow me out. He stayed in the corner by the couch, ears flat, whining under his breath. Not so much a guard dog, huh? But at least maybe some kind of early warning system. I took a drag and told myself it was nothing. But then I heard a noise. Snap. Not a twig, not some squirrel darting off or a deer walking by. This was heavy, like a thick branch cracking because something heavy had stepped on it. It came from the tree line, just past the shed. I froze, cigarette shaking between my fingers, eyes locked on the dark walls of trees. And then another snap. And then that smell hit me. Same as before, only worse. Wet fur, old rot, and something metallic. Like old blood. It rolled across the yard like a fog, and it made my stomach turn. And then, this creature that I hardly have words for, stepped out. At first, my brain didn't want to believe what I was seeing. It looked like a wolf, but not really. It was standing on two legs, and far taller than me, by a good few feet. It was covered in thick, dark fur, black, I believe, and it caught the porch light just enough for the ends to shine. Its shoulders were massive. Its chest made these heaving breaths like a man, but its arms were too long to be natural, and ended in hands that looked like a raccoon. It had a canine's head for sure, but stretched, broader, thicker muzzle. Everything about the head was just exaggerated. The teeth flashed as it opened its mouth in a low, rumbling growl that rattled my chest. The eyes were the worst part in my opinion, though. They were glowing yellow, not like a reflection, not like anything that we discussed like that, but like there was something alive burning inside of them, like they illuminated their own light. And I know that sounds weird and very paranormal, but we're also talking about some type of werewolf creature that was stepping out of the woods and stalking me, so maybe normal just gets thrown out of the window as soon as you start discussing these creatures. And no, to answer your question, they weren't dumb animal eyes. They were intelligent, studying me. You asked how I responded to it? Well, I couldn't move. I was shocked to my core at what I was looking at. My cigarette was still trembling between my fingers, and I'm sure the ash was spilling down my jacket like I was some kind of doofus. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare back at this creature like I was stuck in some kind of trance. It took a step closer. I could hear the gravel crunch under its weight. And then it let out another growl. It just rolled right out of it, deeper this time, like it was testing me, letting me know that it could end me in a second if it wanted to. I think that it was making those noises to see how I would react, to see if I would attack or flee. But I didn't do either. I just stood there, frozen in place. We locked eyes, and I swear that this thing was weighing me, like a hunter does with prey, deciding if the kill is worth the effort. My knees went weak. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die, on my porch with a smoke in my hand. Will it get my family? Will they be safe inside? And then, just like that, it huffed. This sharp, heavy snort, like it was annoyed or bored, maybe even disappointed by my reaction. It turned its head, almost like it was dismissing me, like I didn't matter, then pivoted on two legs and melted back into the forest without another sound. I stood there shaking, cigarette burned down to the filter, heart pounding so hard that it actually hurt my chest. And in that moment, I knew for sure. Whatever had been living in that shed hadn't moved on. It was still there. I had seen it, and it was something that I can't describe anything other than a werewolf. And it wasn't something that we wanted to mess with, or could even survive against. Now, I don't remember walking back inside. I don't remember responding after that thing walked away. All I remember is 1 second I was on the porch, shaking like a leaf, and the next I was slamming the deadbolt and yanking the chain across the door. Not that that flimsy bit of metal was going to save us from that thing. Jen was standing in the kitchen in a robe. Her eyes were wide. She didn't even ask at first. She just looked at my face, and I watched the color drain out of hers. "What did you see?" she whispered. I sat down hard at the table. I realized that the cigarette butt was still in my hand. It had died out a long time ago. So I told her everything, every detail that I could remember. She just sat down across from me and started crying. We never told the kids the truth. We just said it was a big animal and we had to be careful at night. But kids aren't dumb. They noticed the way the dog refused to go outside after dark, the way I triple-checked the locks, the way Jen would get jumpy at every sound sometimes. They noticed the nights when Mia came running into our room saying she heard scratching at her window again. Sometimes late at night we'd even hear a knocking on the shed. Not banging or any sound like it was trying to get in somewhere. Just 3 slow knocks that were deliberate, like it was reminding us it was still there. Other times, Sam said when he looked out the window he could see glowing eyes in the tree line, staring at the house. We stuck it out through the winter, but by spring we'd had enough. We packed up and moved closer to Sudbury, into a small neighborhood with streetlights and neighbors right across the road. And let me tell you, the city noise never sounded so good. But here's the thing, man. I never forgot that night. None of us did, even now, years later. I won't step outside after dark without a floodlight and something heavy in my hands, even in the cityscape that I'm in now. Because once you've seen something like that, once you've felt it watching you and measuring you, you can't go back to just pretending the woods are trees and shadows and nothing else. We cleaned out that shed like it was ours, but it wasn't. Whatever lived there before us, well, it never really left. And I got the very strong indication from that creature that it had claimed that territory as its own. And when something like that is right in front of you, you take those threats seriously. Thanks for listening to this. I really appreciate it. Charles. My name's Jean-Paul. I'm 56 years old now. I have 2 grown kids and a back that reminds me every morning I've spent my life doing hard work. Most of my career was with the railway. Maintenance, inspections, long shifts in places most people wouldn't set foot in. Back in my 20s, I was on the night crew. I'd get sent to check the rails in the north, miles from any town. Just us, the steel, and the forest pressing in on both sides. A lot of men hated those jobs. It was too quiet, too lonely. They were away from their families. But back then, it was before I met my wife. I liked that solitude. I liked the rhythm of the lantern swinging in my hand. I liked the sound of the gravel under my boots, and the way the woods looked when the moon hit the rails. I wasn't the type to scare easy either. I'd seen wolves crossing the line, bears sniffing around the garbage bins, moose so big they looked like trucks with legs. Out there, animals are just part of the shift. You give them space, they give you space, and everyone walks away fine. Of course, you don't go there unprotected either. That's what I believed. That's how I lived. Until one night in northern Quebec, when I found out there's something in those woods that doesn't care about the rules that man sets forth. It was mid-September, damp and cold enough that my breath fogged out in front of me. Our crew had been sent to inspect a stretch of track north of Chibougamau, a place so far off the map you could walk half a day and not hit another soul. We worked in pairs sometimes, but that night everyone was spread thin, maybe even miles apart. I was on my own section. My truck was parked back down the line, lantern in hand, notebook in my pocket, just me and the rails. The woods were thick on both sides, black spruce and birch leaning over the track like they wanted to close it off. My lantern was swinging with each step, throwing light across the rails in sharp, moving slices. Every so often I stopped, Crouched, ran a gloved hand along the steel, checking for cracks or frost heaves. Wrote notes by lantern glow, and then just kept moving on. Normally, the forest is alive at night. Owls, wolves, at least the rustle of small things in the brush. But that night, it was different. Too still. Even the air felt heavy, like sound itself had been swallowed up or something. I remember pausing once, holding the lantern out and just listening. There was nothing. No birds, no life, just the faint hiss of my own breath in the cold. That's when the hair on the back of my neck started to rise. Not long after that pause, I started moving again, lantern just swaying at my side. That's when I heard it, though. Branches shifting in the trees by my right. I stopped. The sound stopped, too. I frowned, tilted my head, and listened as hard as I could. The woods just stayed quiet, so I kept walking. A few steps later, crack! A branch snapped in the same rhythm as my boots. Again I stopped, but it was followed by silence again. My first thought was wolf. I'd seen them shadow people before, curious but cautious. Then I thought maybe a bear, big enough to make the brush snap like that. But the longer it went on, the less it felt like an animal blundering through the forest. Whatever was out there felt careful, almost human intelligence. Every time I walked, the thing out there walked too. Every time I stopped, it froze. The weight of it was clear in the sound. The branches were giving way, and they weren't twigs. They were thick, dry limbs breaking under something heavy. The steps weren't random or hurried. They were measured and steady. I'd been out in the woods more nights than I could count, and I knew the difference between an animal's wandering and something with intent. And whatever was in those trees was matching me, step for step. I kept moving, slower now, lantern swinging wider, casting shadows into the trees. That's when the light caught something. Two eyes, low at first, and then rising, like whatever it was had stood up straighter. They didn't flash like normal animal eyes. They shimmered, almost oily, shifting between gold and green, like light sliding across water. I stopped dead, heart pounding. And then this beast stepped out. The way it moved was slow and deliberate, and it came from between the spruces, right onto the tracks ahead of me. Now when I say this thing was massive, I'm not exaggerating. This thing had to be close to 8 feet tall, but not the thick, bulky kind of mass that you'd expect from a bear. It was lean, strung tight like a starving sprinter. Every muscle under its short, bristled fur looked wiry and ready to snap. The coat itself was this molted gray and black, patchy in places, like smoke stains on brick. The arms hung low, bent at odd angles, ending in clawed fingers that flexed against the steel. I swear I heard them tap the rail, sharp and deliberate, like it was letting me know how it could reach me. The head, it wasn't just a wolf. It was stretched, elongated, muzzle long and narrow, too many teeth showing in a crooked grin that didn't look curious so much as hungry. And the ears that were stuck on the top of its head were upright and twitched, catching every sound that I made. The eyes shimmered. They were fixed on me, not the look of an animal startled into the open. This was the look of something that knew exactly what it was doing. Its stance was wrong too. Perfectly upright, but leaned forward, balanced on the balls of its feet like it was ready to pounce at any second. We locked eyes across that stretch of track. My body screamed run, but I knew damn well if I bolted, it'd be on me before I took 3 steps. So I stood frozen, lantern shaking in my hand, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself not to look away. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring. It could have been 10 seconds, it could have been 10 minutes. I know a lot of encounters say the same thing, but I tell you right now, that's true. Time just kind of loses all sense of meaning when you're in a situation like this. My body didn't care about time. Every nerve I had was locked on those eyes. Finally, though, I made myself move. Just 1 step back, slow, keeping the lantern up between us. Then another. My boots crunched under the gravel, louder than they should have. It followed. Its ears twitched. It wasn't rushing or lunging, just padding forward on the rails. Each step was smooth and silent except for the faint scrape of its claws on the steel. Always the same distance, always those eyes locked on mine. I felt the weight of that stare in my chest. And then this thing growled at me. Low and deep, like it came from inside the ground, up through this creature and into my chest. I swear I could feel it vibrate through my ribs. My knees nearly buckled, but I forced myself to keep backing up, always as slowly as possible. I didn't want to give this thing any reason to charge at me. Halfway to the truck, though, my heel caught a loose tie. I stumbled, lurched forward, almost dropped the damn lantern, and this thing jerked. One sudden step, fast as lightning, closing the gap in a fraction before stopping dead. It was like it was testing me. My heart seized up. I straightened, raised the lantern higher, trying to look bigger than I felt. If it works for a bear, maybe it works for this thing. My hand was shaking so bad the light was jittering all over the rails. But then this thing eased back into that steady rhythm, just pacing me again. Always close enough that I could see the ripple of its muscles. Never close enough to strike. Like a cat stalking a mouse. A mouse that it wasn't ready to eat. The distance never changed, no matter how many careful steps I took. I was walking backwards toward the truck like it was the last safe place on Earth, and the whole time that thing made sure I knew I wasn't getting out of there without its permission. When the shape of my truck finally came into view through the dark, relief hit me so hard I almost cried. But honestly, that's when the whole mood changed. It got even more intense. That creature, the Dogman, now that I know what it's called, hunched low, shoulders rolling forward, ears pinned back tight against its head. Its lips peeled away, showing teeth that looked too long, too sharp, and way too many crowding its mouth in these jagged rows. Then it let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a howl, not a growl. A snarled bark. It was short, sharp, and explosive. It echoed down the tracks, loud enough that the glass on my lantern actually rattled. The sound hit me in the chest like a hammer, froze the blood where I stood. Every instinct now screamed, "Run, get in the truck, run." But some part of me, the part that still wanted to see the sunrise, kept my legs steady. I forced my steps to stay even, forced my breathing to stay slow. Honestly, this is the worst fear I've ever felt in my life. But I did everything I could to stay calm. Step by step, I reached the truck. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the keys, but somehow I got the door open, climbed in, slammed it shut. My fingers fumbled across the ignition and twisted. The headlights burst to life, cutting across the rails. That's when it whipped its head sideways, fast and violent, like the light had burned its eyes or something. And in the same instant, it bolted forwards toward the truck. This thing was like liquid lightning. All I could do was lay on the horn, hoping to scare it off. I guess it worked. I'm still here talking about it, right? It reached the truck in seconds and snarled into the glass, but I think the sound of the horn hurt its ears, because as I laid on the horn, it started to back up and shake its head violently. Then it took off in the other direction. It actually dropped to all fours mid-sprint and galloped away. It didn't run like a wolf or a bear. It moved faster. It blurred into the tree line, vanishing so quick I lost sight of it. And then it was gone. But I knew it hadn't left because it was scared. It had left because it wanted to. I didn't sit in that truck very long. My hands were shaking on the wheel and my heart hammering was so loud it drowned out everything else, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I didn't finish the inspection, obviously. I didn't even try. I could have died on those rails. I threw the truck into gear the moment I could and drove straight back to the yard, eyes locked on the mirrors the whole way, convinced that any second I'd see that thing loping behind me in the beams of the taillight, or cutting across the street and trying to run me off the road. The next morning, my crew boss asked me why my sheet wasn't filled out. I just said, there was a big wolf on the line. It wasn't safe. He raised an eyebrow, but knew me well enough not to push. I wasn't a man who spooked over nothing. That was all I ever gave him. And that's all I ever gave anyone. For decades. You don't tell stories like that if you want to be taken seriously. Men like me, we keep our mouths shut and keep working. But it ate at me. Every long stretch of track, every shift where the woods went still, I thought about those eyes. About how it tested me, toyed with me, and let me live because it chose to let me live. Not because I escaped. I didn't tell the truth until years later, when my kids were grown, and I'd figured I'd earned the right to be believed. Or at least, not to be laughed at. One night at the dinner table, I told them the whole story. They sat quiet, hanging on every word. When I finished, I saw the look in their eyes. Not disbelief or pity, but the same chill that I'd carried with me all those years. I leaned back and I told them, "We think we built the railway through the woods. Maybe we did. But that night, I learned the tracks don't just belong to us. Something else walks them too. And if it wants to take any of us, it has the capability to." My name's Rick. I've been hunting since I was old enough to carry a .22, and I'll tell you right now, I'm not the type to spook easy in the woods. Neither is my buddy, Dave. You see, the two of us grew up together. We've been chasing deer, moose, and everything in between for over 30 years. We're not trophy guys, and we never have been. We hunt for meat, plain and simple. Fill the freezer, share with family, do it the way our dads taught us. This trip was supposed to be one for the books. We talked about going deeper north for years, and finally decided this was the season. We wanted a big bull, and we wanted the quiet that comes with being far beyond anyone else's reach. The kind of country where you lose cell service, and the only sound you hear is nature at its finest. Northern Saskatchewan doesn't play around. The terrain is rugged, marsh in one spot, thick bush in the next. Trails vanish if you're not careful, and when the sun goes down, it's blacker than a shut-off mine. But we knew what we were doing. We had maps, compasses, gear, rifles, and the kind of experience you need out there to make it through alive. The drive up was all jokes and trash talk, the way it always is with us. Dave swore he'd be the first one to drop a moose. I told him I'd bag it before he even chambered around. He laughed, called me a city shot, and cracked open a thermos of coffee that smelled like it'd been brewing for a week. That's just the way we are. Always needling each other, always competing, but solid as they come when it counts. We left the truck at the end of a dirt trail, strapped our packs and rifles, and hiked in a few miles till we found a good spot by a creek to set up camp. It felt right. Quiet, still, a good water source close by. If moose were anywhere around, we'd find signs soon enough. At that point, all we had on our minds was who'd be bragging back at the cabin with the first rack in the bed of the truck. We had no clue what else was out there waiting for us. The hike in wasn't easy, but that's part of the deal. Packs biting into our shoulders, rifles slung, boots sucking at the marsh in a few spots. By the time we found the creek David marked out on the map, my shirt was damp and my calves were burning, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything. The water ran clear and steady, a good sign. Moose sign too, tracks in the mud, and chewed willow. We picked a flat spot near the bank and went to work. Tent staked down, fire pit scraped out, a ring of stones laid down. Dave chopped a little deadfall, I got the fire going. Pretty soon we had the orange glow snapping and popping, smoke curling up through the branches. There's a peace that you can't explain to folks who don't hunt or camp. Out there's no trucks, no buzzing cell phones, no neighbors mowing lawns. Just firelight on your boots and the steady dark all around you. We cooked up a skillet of beans and bacon, passed around a couple of cold ones we packed in, and let the silence settle in between us. Every so often you'd hear a loon calling from somewhere down the creek, or that haunting wail coming from across the water. Later, when the sky went full dark, we picked up the sounds of wolves way off in the distance. Thin, eerie howls that carried through the trees. But those howls didn't bother us. That's just the north reminding you you're not the only thing living out there. When the fire burned low and we finally kicked dirt over the coals, I remember saying, "Listen to that." Dave tilted his head, then nodded. The forest had gone so still that it almost hurt your ears. No bugs. Nothing at all. Just silence, deep and heavy. "It's like everything out here is spooked all of a sudden," Dave muttered, pulling his jacket a little tighter. I laughed, but even then a little shiver ran down my spine. I chalked it up to the cold and crawled into my sleeping bag. Sometime after midnight I woke up. Not sure what did it. Maybe instinct. Maybe the silence. I laid there listening, trying to figure out why my eyes had popped open. And that's when I heard something that I wasn't expecting. Breathing. Not mine and not Dave's. It was something outside of the tent. Heavy, slow pulls of air, like a big set of lungs dragging in and pushing it out. My skin prickled instantly. I nudged Dave with my elbow and whispered, "You hear that?" He didn't answer, just went still. Then I felt him shift upright in his bag. We both held our breath, straining to listen. Crunch. A footstep in the leaves. Not a light shuffle either. Not the scratch of a rabbit. This was heavy. The kind of weight that makes the ground speak for itself. Another step followed, then another. Whatever was out there was circling us. We sat silent, clutching our rifles close, eyes useless in this kind of dark. The thing moved slow, thoughtful, pacing a full circle around the tent before stopping, and then doing it again. Every few steps, a branch would snap, or I'd feel the faintest vibration in the ground under my shoulder. Then it stopped, right at the tent flap. I swear I could hear it leaning down. I could hear long, deep inhales, like it was smelling the canvas. Smelling us. The sound rattled me, though. Animal, but too close. Too smart, somehow. My pulse was pounding in my throat. Not out of fear, but of knowing how serious the situation could get. And how quickly it could get that way. Dave's hand found mine in the dark. Not something to comfort, more like a don't move, don't breathe kind of halt. We stayed that way for what felt like forever. Then without warning, the sniffing stopped. There was a beat of silence. Then the footsteps started again, moving away from the tent this time. They were slow and steady until the sound faded into the trees. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us slept. We just sat in the dark, rifles crossed our laps, waiting for dawn. Whatever was out there had weight, lungs, and intent, and it knew exactly where we were. When the first light finally started leaking through the trees, me and Dave unzipped that tent like we were peeling back a bandage. Neither of us had slept, just sat there listening, waiting for something to come crashing back through camp. The air was cold, our breath fogging up as we stepped out. Everything looked ordinary. The creek trickled steady, the trees stood quiet, the fire pit was cold ash, but the ground told a different story. There were tracks, and big ones. They went all the way around our tent, clear as day in the dirt and the pine needles. I crouched down, squinting at the closest print. It wasn't a moose, no cloven split, and it sure wasn't a bear. These prints were too long, and the toes were splayed wide, claws dug deep into the ground. It looked like a wolf's paw, only stretched or elongated, and with an almost human air to it. If a human were a paw instead of a foot, that's exactly what this thing would be. The pad was wide, bigger than my hand. The stride between steps was too long, longer than any four-legged animal I'd ever seen. Whatever made those prints wasn't moving on all fours, it was walking upright. Dave let out a shaky laugh and nudged me with his foot. Bear standing up. Happens sometimes, he said. I didn't answer. I just traced the line of prints with my eyes, watching them lead off towards the tree line. They didn't wander or shuffle. They were deliberate. Something had circled us like a predator sizing up a kill. Bear don't walk circles on 2 feet in the dark sniffing at tents, I finally said. Dave's turn not to reply. He just adjusted the strap of his rifle and looked at the trees. His face was pale. The prints disappeared into the shadows of the bush, back where the night had carried that breathing thing off. Now, what you need to know is I've hunted all my life, seen every track you can find in Saskatchewan, but I'd never seen anything like those. And deep down, I knew damn well Dave hadn't either. We tried to shake it off. Hunters see strange things sometimes. Tracks that don't make sense. Shadows that play tricks on tired eyes. That's what I told myself anyway. Dave wasn't buying it either, not really. But he kept saying, let's hunt. That's what we came for. So we loaded our rifles, left camp, and pushed deeper into the bush. Only, it just didn't feel right. Normally, when you're hunting, you blend into the rhythm of the woods. You listen for birds or the crack of branches, or a bull crashing through the brush. You feel part of it. But that morning, every sound made my skin crawl. A branch snapping in the distance didn't sound like a moose. It sounded like something following us. The wind moving through the trees felt heavier than it should have, and with it came a smell that was disturbing. Like wild animal, but nothing like I'd ever smelled before. And always that feeling on the back of my neck, like eyes boring into me from the tree line. I've done this long enough to listen to that voice, and something was chewing at me, telling me this wasn't normal, that we weren't around something that should be out here. We saw sign of moose, sure, fresh tracks in the mud, stripped willows, even some droppings, but both of us were too jumpy to settle in and call. We'd stop, stand quiet, listen, Then a twig would break behind us, and we'd whip around with the rifles raised, hearts hammering, only to see nothing but trees swaying. By noon, though, I started catching movement. Not clear, not long, just flickers or so between the trunks, something dark slipping out of sight the second I turned my head. Once I swore I saw it crouch low, but when I blinked, it was like it was gone. I didn't say anything to Dave at first, but I could tell he was seeing it too. He was scanning harder than usual, keeping his rifle tight against his shoulder. Jaw locked. We didn't crack jokes like we usually did. We didn't talk about who was going to drop the first bull. We just walked, silent, like two men too far from home. By late afternoon, we hadn't taken a single shot. Hell, we haven't even raised our scopes at a moose. Finally, Dave sighed and said, "I don't like it out here, man. Something ain't right. Let's pack it up in the morning." I nodded right away, because I'd been thinking the same damn thing since sunrise. We headed back to camp with the sun sinking fast, both of us moving quicker than we needed to, rifles always in hand. And even though I never saw it clear, I knew damn well something had been out there shadowing us. And it wasn't a moose. We didn't even wait for morning. By late afternoon, both of us had had that itch. Time to get out. The woods were too quiet, too heavy, and neither of us had the stomach for another night like the last one. We started breaking camp early, rolling sleeping bags, strapping packs, getting ready to make fast walk back to the truck before dark. I was crouched by the fire pit, shaking out the ash, when I glanced up across the clearing and finally caught a glance at what the thing was that had been following us. At first, my brain refused to line up the pieces. The shape crouched in the tree line was too big and too broad. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a stump, but then it shifted. Shoulders rippled under thick, dark fur. Long arms were hanging down almost to its knees, and those arms had claws catching the sun. The head? Pure wolf. Long canine muzzle, ears that stood up straight, eyes that weren't reflecting but glowing. Not the dumb shine of an animal caught in a flashlight. These were sharp, smart, and watchful. A hunter's eyes. It wasn't moving towards us, just squatting low, staring, watching. My throat went dry. I leaned toward Dave, barely whispering, "Don't move. Look at the trees." He followed my gaze. The moment his eyes locked on it, his whole body went rigid. His jaw clenched, his face pale as paper. None of us said a word. For several long seconds, it was just us and it. Two men out in the open, one nightmare in the shadows. No sound, no movement, just the weight of it pressing down on us, daring us to blink. I got my rifle ready as slowly and calmly as I could. Dave followed my lead, but even as we did, it was like that thing knew what a rifle was, because when we started to move, it started getting agitated. It went as rigid as we did, sort of straightened up and lifted its lip ever so slightly. "If it comes close, we take it down," Dave told me in less than a whisper. Then, as sudden as it appeared, it shifted backwards, melting into the trees like smoke. 1 second it was there, the next it was followed by the bush. I realized then that I'd been holding my breath. Dave let his pack fall to the ground with a thud. Neither of us moved until the wind picked up, shaking the branches and breaking that awful silence. We didn't argue, we didn't debate what we saw. We just knew. We didn't cook, we didn't sit down, we didn't even look at each other. The second that thing melted into the trees, me and Dave both knew what came next. We shoved the essentials into our packs, rifles, ammo, food, and water, left everything else where it lay. Tent, cookware, spare gear, didn't matter anymore. We were getting out, and that was the only thing that mattered. The sun was dropping fast, shadows crawling along across the clearing. By the time we slung our packs and started moving, I could feel the dark chasing us. Every step away from that campsite felt too slow. We hiked hard, boots pounding the trail, rifles in hand. Neither of us said a word. The forest said plenty for us. Snap, off to our right. Another crack to the left, keeping pace. It was following. Not close enough to see, but close enough to hear. The weight of branches giving way, the steady rhythm of something matching us stride for stride. Every so often, the smell hit. Wet fur and old meat mixed with the copper tang of whatever it had killed last. It was drifting in the wind. My heart was a drum in my chest, but I forced my legs to keep moving. Dave's breath was ragged, but he never slowed. And only once he hissed, "Don't stop, just don't stop." I don't know if he was talking to me, him or both of us. So we didn't. For nearly 4 miles, we moved fast through that dying light, stalked from both sides, waiting for it to lunge. But it never did. It just shadowed us, letting us know that it was there, herding us out of its woods. When the truck finally came into view at the end of the dirt trail, I swear I could have cried. We threw the packs into the bed and went for the cab, but as we did, that thing let out a roar that could have scared a lion. Loudest thing I've ever heard, like a mix of anger and a warning. It was that thing's last remark to us to get the hell out of its territory. We slammed the doors, fired the engines, and tore out of there without looking back. Even as the tires spun gravel behind us, I could still feel its presence, out there in the trees, watching us leave. My hands shook on the wheel the whole way back down that road. Dave didn't say a word, and neither did I. Our silence said enough. We didn't tell a soul at first. Not our wives, not the boys at camp, not anyone. Out here, you start talking about monsters in the woods and you'll never live it down. They'd laugh, call us drunk, say we mistook a bear. But keeping quiet didn't make it go away either. It stuck with us like burrs. Every quiet moment, I'd hear the sniffing outside the tent. Every time the wind went still, I'd see those eyes in the tree line. And Dave? He took it worse than me. A couple weeks later, he started dropping hints. "You ever heard of the Wendigo?" he'd ask one night over beers. Another time he said, "You know, down east, they got stories about wolfmen. Rougarou, they call them." And eventually, he started throwing around the word dogman. Said people had been seeing these things for years all over North America. He wasn't joking. He was digging, reading, printing out stuff off the internet, even buying old books. The more he found, the more obsessed he got, and the more convinced he became that what we saw wasn't some bear standing up, or a trick of light. It was real. Dave never went back to that area. Hell, within a couple of years, he quit hunting altogether. Said he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, that he'd rather hang up the rifle than risk seeing that thing again. Me, I still hunt. I can't give it up. It's my life. But I don't camp that far north anymore. And I'll tell you this, I don't feel easy in the bush after dark. When the sun goes down and the woods go still, I get the crawling feeling on the back of my neck. I finish up fast and I get the hell out of there. People like us, we thought we knew the backcountry. Thought we knew every sound, every track, every shadow. But that trip proved something else. We thought we knew the backcountry. But something out there knows it better.